I knew they'd be arriving any minute, neighbors in their Sunday best, folding chairs clattering, covered dishes in hand, and high expectations in their eyes. But I wasn't there. I was 30,000 feet in the air, sipping bad airplane coffee with my heart racing, knowing full well what I had left behind. An empty courtyard, no tables, no lights, no food, just silence. Nancy Prescott must have been livid. She had ordered me to make this year's Crescent Pines annual block dinner unforgettable. And well, I did. Just not the way she expected. As the plane sliced through the sky, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The endless demands, the fake smiles, the whispered judgments, the emotional blackmail. They wanted perfection. They got reality. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The knock came at precisely 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in April, the kind of spring evening when the air smells like possibility. I was halfway through a glass of wine and an episode of a show I wasn't really watching when I heard 3 sharp raps at my front door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Nancy Prescott's knocks were as distinctive as her personality, authoritative, precise, and impossible to ignore. "Samantha, I'm so glad you're home." Her voice chimed with practiced warmth as I opened the door. Nancy stood on my porch in crisp white linen pants and a navy blouse, clipboard already in hand, her blonde bob not daring to move in the gentle breeze. "Hi, Nancy," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful," she beamed, though her eyes darted past me to scan my living room. "May I come in? I have something exciting to discuss." 15 minutes later, I had somehow agreed to coordinate the entire Crescent Pines annual block dinner, an event that fed 35 households, required city permits, and according to Nancy, set the tone for our community's entire social calendar. "You're just perfect for this, Samantha," Nancy insisted, writing my name in her leather-bound planner with a flourish. "You're organized, creative, and frankly, you have the flexibility that most of us don't." What she meant was, you're single, childless, and therefore available. I wanted to tell her I had deadlines at work, that my graphic design business was finally gaining traction. I wanted to tell her that flexibility wasn't the same as availability. But instead, I heard myself say, "I'm happy to help." Nancy beamed. "I knew we could count on you. The dinner's always the second Saturday in July. That gives you—" She consulted her color-coded calendar. "Just over 3 months. Plenty of time." After she left, I sat alone on my couch, wondering why I couldn't say no. But deep down, I knew. I'd moved to Crescent Pines 3 years. Ego after my engagement imploded, and burnout forced me to leave my agency job in Chicago. This suburban enclave outside Denver was supposed to be my fresh start. And maybe, just maybe, planning this dinner would finally make me feel like I belonged. The next morning, Nancy emailed me a 20-page document titled Annual Block Dinner Guidelines and Standards of Excellence. The previous coordinator had apparently kept meticulous records. As I scrolled through the document, my stomach tightened. This wasn't a neighborhood potluck. This was a production. Required elements included themed table settings, last year, Mediterranean summer, coordinated lighting scheme, printed programs, name cards with seating assignments, activities for children, speech by the HOA president, professional quality, photographs, and, inexplicably, memorable party favors. I called my friend Abby, who had moved away from Crescent Pines last year. "They got you, didn't they?" She sighed when I told her. "What do you mean, got me?" "The dinner, it's Nancy's way of hazing newcomers. She waits until you've been there long enough to feel guilty saying no, then dumps it on you." "That's not—" I started, but Abby cut me off. "Sam, I organized it 2 years ago. It's a nightmare. Nancy critiques everything but helps with nothing. And when it's over, she takes all the credit." "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Would you have listened?" Abby's voice was gentle. "You've been so desperate to fit in there." Her words stung because they were true. Since moving to Crescent Pines, I'd volunteered for committees, attended every neighborhood function, and even joined the garden club despite killing every houseplant I'd ever owned. All to be accepted, to belong. "Just be careful," Abby warned. "Nancy's idea of community is having people she can control." I brushed off Abby's concerns. After all, how hard could planning one dinner be? The answer came swiftly. The next day, Nancy dropped by with a stack of binders, records from previous dinners. She stayed for 2 hours, outlining her vision. "The theme this year is summer elegance," she declared. "Think champagne tones, fairy lights, and garden roses. Nothing too casual. We want to impress the new families on Maple Court. Did you know the Hendersons are both surgeons? I thought this was just a neighborhood. Get together, I ventured. Nancy's laugh was like glass breaking. Oh, Samantha, this dinner is how we show the world who we are at Crescent Pines. It's not just food, it's our identity. Over the next few weeks, my dining table disappeared under spreadsheets, sample menus, and decoration catalogs. My evenings and weekends vanished into a vortex of planning. Nancy's texts became a constant presence. On my phone, the tablecloths must be real linen. No polyester blends. Can you check if the Millers are bringing their gluten-free lasagna again? It was dry last year. The city councilwoman might attend. We need to make sure she's seated with the right people. Meanwhile, my actual work, the graphic design business I'd built from scratch after leaving Chicago, began to suffer. I missed deadlines. I turned down new clients. I stayed up until 2 a.m. catching up on projects, only to wake to more text from Nancy. The breaking point came during a preliminary planning meeting at my house. Nancy had invited the core committee, women who'd lived in Crescent Pines for decades and who scrutinized my home with thinly veiled judgment. Your backyard would be perfect for a pre-dinner. Cocktail hour, Margaret Whitman declared, peering through my sliding glass door at my modest patio. Oh, I don't think, I began. Brilliant idea, Margaret, Nancy interrupted. Samantha can set up a bar station by that sad little herb garden. We'll need to bring in some decent outdoor furniture, of course. They continued planning as if I wasn't there, transforming my home into a venue and my role from coordinator to caterer, decorator, and server. When I tried to object, Nancy placed her hand on mine. We're all counting on you, dear, she said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. You wouldn't want to disappoint everyone, would you? As they left, I stood in my doorway feeling hollow. I'd agreed to organize a dinner, but somehow I'd become responsible for creating a perfect fantasy of suburban bliss. And for what? So that Nancy could show off to the city councilwoman? So that the doctors on Maple Court would feel impressed? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, wondering how I'd gotten here. A grown woman unable to set boundaries, desperate for approval from people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be used. Abby's words echoed in my mind. Nancy's idea of community is having people she can control. And for the first time, I wondered if Crescent Pines was really the community I wanted to belong to after all. By mid-June, the block dinner had consumed my life. My refrigerator door disappeared under a cascade of lists. My kitchen table became command central, and my living room housed stacks of sample decorations Nancy insisted I try out before making final decisions. The neighborhood courtyard, where the dinner would be held, needed to be transformed from a simple communal space with concrete benches and a small fountain into Nancy's vision of summer elegance. This apparently required custom-built table platforms to create different levels, a canopy of twinkling lights, and floral arrangements that would cost more than my monthly mortgage. The ambience must be perfect, Nancy insisted during one of her impromptu visits to my home. She had taken to dropping by unannounced, always with a critical eye and fresh demands. Don't you think this is getting a bit excessive? I ventured, looking at the quote from the lighting company. It's just one evening. Nancy's smile tightened. Samantha, this dinner sets the tone for our entire community. Do you really want to be remembered as the coordinator who cut corners? The guilt trip worked. It always did. So I called the lighting company and put down the deposit on my credit card, with Nancy's promise that the HOA would reimburse me eventually. Work continued to suffer. I lost a major client when I missed a deadline for the third time. My sister called, concerned that I'd been absent from our weekly video chats. I'm just busy with this neighborhood thing, I explained, too embarrassed to admit how much it had overtaken my life. Sounds like these people are taking advantage of you, she said bluntly. It's not like that, I insisted, even as I stood in a kitchen full of test recipes Nancy had asked me to prepare. I'm part of a community now. But was I? Despite all my efforts, I still felt like an outsider at Crescent Pines. When I attended the garden club, conversations stopped when I approached. At the community pool, the other women smiled politely, but never invited me to join their conversations. I was good enough to work for them, but not to befriend. One evening, I was comparing quotes from rental companies when my doorbell rang. It was Abby, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a concerned expression. Surprise intervention, she announced, pushing past me into the house. She stopped short when she saw my living room. Oh, Sam, it's not that bad, I said weakly. You're living in a party planning warehouse. She picked up a sample menu card. Seriously? Calligraphy place cards? For a neighborhood potluck? It's not a potluck, I corrected her automatically. It's a coordinated dining experience. Abby snorted. Listen to yourself. You sound like Nancy. We sat on my porch with glasses of wine, the summer twilight settling around us. Abby had moved to Boulder last year, trading Crescent Pines for a smaller condo in a vibrant neighborhood near her new job. I don't get it, Sam. This isn't you. You used to design. Campaigns for global brands. Now you're stressing over napkin colors for a bunch of judgmental suburbanites who don't even appreciate you. They'll appreciate me when they see how beautiful everything is, I insisted. No, they won't, Abby said gently. They'll just expect more next time. That's how it works with people like Nancy. No matter what you do, it's never enough. I just want to belong somewhere, I admitted, my voice small. After everything that happened in Chicago, you don't have to earn belonging, Sam. Real community accepts you as you are. It doesn't demand perfection. I wanted to believe her, but 3 years of trying to fit in at Crescent Pines had conditioned me to think otherwise. Acceptance felt conditional, always just out of reach behind the next committee, the next volunteer opportunity, the next perfectly executed neighborhood event. The final weeks before the dinner became a blur of tasks and Nancy's escalating demands. She added a signature cocktail to the menu, insisted we needed valet parking, and decided the courtyard fountain needed to be temporarily transformed with floating candles and rose petals. And of course, you'll be handling the welcome speech, she informed me 3 days before the event. Me? I thought the HOA president always gives the welcome. Charles is so dull, Nancy waved her hand dismissively. You're much more articulate. Just keep it brief, thank all the right people, especially me for my vision, and make sure to acknowledge the city councilwoman if she attends. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter at 1 a.m., surrounded by seating charts, vendor contracts, and half-written welcome speeches. My phone dinged with yet another text from Nancy. Forgot to mention, the Johnsons are bringing their cousins from Phoenix. That's 2 more for dinner. Make it work. I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me. 3 months of stress, thousands of dollars in personal expenses with vague promises of reimbursement, countless hours of unpaid labor, and a business on the verge of collapse, all for an event where I wasn't even truly welcome. My phone dinged again. Also, can you arrive at 7 a.m. to supervise setup? And wear something appropriate. No jeans or casual tops. Think elegant but not flashy. We don't want you outshining anyone. The message hit me like a slap. I wasn't a neighbor to these people. I wasn't even a person. I was a function. A convenient service provider who should remain visible enough to do the work, but invisible enough not to disrupt the social hierarchy. I thought about Abby's words. Real community accepts you as you are. For 3 years, I'd been trying to earn my place in Crescent Pines. I'd bent myself into shapes that didn't fit, swallowed my opinions, donated my time, and now sacrificed my business, all to please people who would never see me as one of them. The realization settled over me with unexpected calm. I looked around at my home, transformed into block dinner headquarters, and suddenly saw it all so clearly. I had been trying to buy acceptance with exhaustion, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. The night before the block dinner, I couldn't sleep. My house was impeccable. Not for me, but for the core committee meeting scheduled for 7 a.m. The rental company had delivered tables and chairs to the courtyard. The florist would arrive at noon. The lighting specialist would begin installation at 2 p.m. Everything was arranged with military precision. Everything except my heart, which felt hollow. At midnight, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, listening to the quiet neighborhood. Across the courtyard, I could see Nancy's house, lights still on, probably finalizing her outfit for tomorrow. The woman never rested, and she never let anyone around her rest either. My phone buzzed. Another text from Nancy. Don't forget to pick up the ice, at least 15 bags. Quality ice? Not that cloudy stuff from the gas station. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked my work email. 3 new project requests had come in this week. All declined because I didn't have the bandwidth. Translation: I was too busy planning a dinner for people who wouldn't even remember my name next month. I closed my laptop and walked through my house, taking inventory of what it had become. A satellite office for Nancy's social aspirations. Every surface cluttered with binders, samples, and checklists. Every corner of my life infiltrated by someone else's demands. At 1:23 a.m., I made a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen counter. I pulled out a notepad and made 2 columns. What I owe this neighborhood and what I owe myself. The first column was short. I paid my HOA dues. I maintained my property. I was polite to my neighbors. The second column was longer than I expected. I owed myself respect, time to rebuild my business, freedom from emotional manipulation, the right to say no, the courage to find a community that valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. At 2:17 a.m., I opened my laptop again and visited a website I hadn't looked at in months. Abby's rental listing in Santa Cruz. She'd been trying to find a subletter for her beach cottage while she was traveling for work next week. It's perfect for a getaway, she'd told me weeks ago. Quiet, right by the ocean. You should come visit. I dismissed it then. I was too busy with the dinner. Now I stared at the photos of the small cottage with its blue door and window boxes full of flowers. In the background of one shot, you could see a strip of ocean, silver in the moonlight. Before I could second-guess myself, I sent Abby a text. Is your Santa Cruz place still available next week? She responded immediately, despite the hour. Yes. You finally taking a break? Something like that. I typed back. Can I come tomorrow? 3 dots appeared as she typed. Tomorrow? What about the dinner? I took a deep breath and typed the words that would change everything. I'm not going to be there. Abby called immediately. Sam, what's happening? Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, and realized I meant it. Actually, I'm better than I've been in months. I'm just done. Done with the dinner or done with Crescent Pines? Both. Neither. I don't know yet, but I know I need to get away before I lose myself completely. There was a pause. Then Abby said, The cottage is yours, for as long as you need. But Sam, what are you going to tell Nancy? Nothing, I said, the word tasting like freedom on my tongue. Absolutely nothing. After we hung up, I moved with purpose. I booked a 6 a.m. flight to San Jose. I packed a small suitcase with casual clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sundresses, all the things Nancy would deem inappropriate for a neighborhood coordinator. I tucked my laptop in my bag, along with my sketchbooks and design tools. At 4:30 a.m., I locked my front door and put the key under the mat for my sister, who would come check on things next week. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send any texts. I simply walked away from the life I'd been trying to force myself into for 3 years. As my rideshare pulled away from Crescent Pines, I looked back at the sleeping houses with their perfect lawns and coordinated mailboxes. For the first time, I saw the neighborhood clearly, not as the idyllic community I'd been chasing, but as a beautiful cage I'd willingly entered. By the time my flight took off, the sky was turning pink with dawn. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I imagined Nancy arriving at my empty house, knocking with increasing frustration, then calling repeatedly only to reach my voicemail. I imagined the committee members gathering in the courtyard, finding no tables set, no lights strung, no welcome speech prepared. I imagined their confusion turning to anger, then panic as they realized their perfect dinner wasn't going to happen, at least, not the way Nancy had planned. And for the first time in years, I smiled a real smile. Not the strained, people-pleasing grimace I'd perfected at Crescent Pines, but a genuine expression of joy. I had chosen myself, and it felt like flying. The Santa Cruz cottage was everything Abby had promised. Small, peaceful, and just 2 blocks from the ocean. The first thing I did after arriving was kick off my shoes and walk to the beach. The sand was cool between my toes, the air tangy with salt. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with something that wasn't anxiety for the first time in months. I sat on the shore for hours, watching the waves roll in and out. My phone remained off in my pocket. Whatever chaos was unfolding back at Crescent Pines would happen without me. That evening, I cooked a simple meal in the cottage's tiny kitchen and ate on the porch, listening to the distant sound of the ocean. No spreadsheets, no checklists, no Nancy peering over my shoulder. It wasn't until the next morning that I finally turned on my phone. It immediately exploded with notifications, 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, and 28 voicemails. Most were from Nancy, but there were others from committee members, from neighbors I barely knew, even from the HOA president. I put the phone down without listening to the messages. Instead, I made a cup of coffee and took my sketchbook to the beach. For the first time in months, I drew for pleasure. Not for clients, not for deadlines, just for the joy of creating something that was entirely mine. Around noon, curiosity finally got the better of me. I returned to the cottage and listened to the first voicemail from Nancy, timestamped 7:23 a.m. yesterday, the moment the committee arrived to find my house empty. Samantha, where are you? We're all at your door. This is completely unprofessional. Call me immediately. The next was from 8:04 a.m. This is beyond unacceptable. People are waiting. The vendors are calling me. What are we supposed to do? If you're having some kind of emergency, the least you could do is answer your phone. By the 9:30 a.m. message, Nancy's voice had reached a pitch I'd never heard before. You've humiliated this entire community. Do you understand what you've done? The councilwoman is coming in 4 hours. I skipped forward to a message from 2 p.m., right when the dinner setup should have been in full swing. We're trying to salvage what we can, no thanks to you. Margaret is ordering pizza. Pizza, Samantha, for the annual block dinner. I hope you're satisfied with yourself. The final message from Nancy came at 10:45 p.m., her voice low and venomous. You're done in this community. Completely done. I've already spoken to the HOA board about this incident. Don't bother coming back. I deleted the rest of her messages without listening, but one voicemail caught my attention. From Karen Landry, a quiet woman who lived at the end of my street. We'd exchanged pleasantries, but never really talked. Hi, Samantha. Her voice was hesitant. I wanted to say, I get it. What Nancy was asking of you was insane. Nobody should have to take all that on alone. Anyway, I hope you're okay wherever you are. There were other messages like Karen's. Not many, but enough. People who saw what had been happening, who recognized the unfairness but had never spoken up. Until now. I spent the rest of the day walking along the cliffs, watching pelicans dive into the ocean. That evening, I finally texted Abby. How bad is it? Her response came quickly. Epic. Complete meltdown. Nancy had to actually work for once. Nearly gave herself an aneurysm trying to organize tables last minute. The pizza was cold, the councilwoman left early, and the Johnsons' cousins from Phoenix got food poisoning from Margaret's potato salad that sat out too long. I winced. So, basically, I ruined everything. No, Abby replied. You exposed everything. There's a difference. Over the next few days, I settled into a rhythm at the cottage. Mornings at the beach, afternoons working on my laptop, reaching out to former clients, updating my portfolio, rebuilding what I'd neglected. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset and feeling my shoulders gradually relax from their permanent position up around my ears. I kept my phone on, but screened all calls. I responded to a few messages, like Karen's, with simple thanks. I ignored Nancy's increasingly elaborate threats about HOA fines and community blacklisting. On day 5, I received an unexpected email from Charles Davis, the HOA president. Dear Samantha, I owe you an apology. The board has reviewed the materials for the block dinner and discovered that the expectations placed upon you were far beyond reasonable volunteer duties. Nancy Prescott has been removed from the events committee pending review of her conduct. While your abrupt departure created difficulties, it has prompted a necessary conversation about how our community functions and the unfair burdens placed on certain members. If you wish to discuss this matter further, I am available at your convenience. Sincerely, Charles O. Davis. I read the email 3 times trying to process what it meant. Nancy, removed from her beloved committee. The board, acknowledging that I had been treated unfairly. It was more than I'd expected. Much more. That night, I sat on the beach until the stars came out, thinking about community and belonging and what those words really meant. I'd spent 3 years trying to earn my place in Crescent Pines, never questioning whether it was the right place for me to begin with. Here, in this little beach town where nobody knew my name, I felt more at peace than I had in years. Maybe belonging wasn't about fitting yourself into an existing structure. Maybe it was about finding the places and people that already fit who you were. As I walked back to the cottage, sand between my toes and salt in my hair, I realized I had a decision to make. Return to Crescent Pines and face the aftermath of my rebellion? Or leave it all behind and start fresh somewhere new? Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again mistake servitude for belonging. After a week in Santa Cruz, I decided to go back to Crescent Pines. Not because I owed the neighborhood anything, but because I owed myself closure. Running away had been necessary, but staying away forever would mean Nancy still had power over me. I refused to let her dictate where I could live. Abby drove me to the airport, concern etched on her face. Are you sure about this? You could stay longer. I'm sure, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I can't hide forever. Besides, I have a house there, and now that Nancy's been knocked off her throne, maybe things will change. Just promise me you won't let them suck you back in, Abby said, hugging me tightly. No more committee meetings, no more volunteer coordination, no more block dinners? I finished with a laugh. Trust me, I'm permanently retired from event planning. My flight landed in Denver late Sunday evening. As my rideshare approached Crescent Pines, I felt my shoulders tensing, my breath becoming shallow. Muscle memory of the anxiety that had defined my life here. I consciously relaxed, reminding myself that I was returning on my terms. I wasn't the same person who had fled in the pre-dawn darkness a week ago. The neighborhood looked unchanged, perfectly manicured lawns, tastefully coordinated house colors, not a stray toy or a garden hose in sight. But something felt different. Maybe it was just me. My house stood dark and quiet, exactly as I'd left it. I retrieved my key from under the mat, half expecting to find my locks changed by an outraged HOA. But the key turned smoothly, and I stepped inside. The evidence of the block dinner was still everywhere. Binders stacked on the dining table, sample decorations piled on. The couch, lists taped to every surface. It was like walking into a museum exhibit of my former life. I dropped my suitcase and opened the windows, letting in the cool evening air. Then I began to reclaim my space, one room at a time. I gathered the binders and shoved them into a box for recycling. I took down every list, every note, every reminder of what I'd allowed myself to become. By midnight, my house looked like mine again. I slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke to a text from Karen Landry. Saw your lights on last night. Welcome back. Coffee sometime this week? No demands, no expectations. Just a simple invitation. I accepted. I spent the day working from home, reconnecting with clients, and ignoring the occasional curtain twitch from neighbors who'd spotted my return. Around 5 p.m., a knock came at my door. I tensed, half expecting to find Nancy on my doorstep, armed with accusations and demands for restitution. Instead, I opened the door to find Charles Davis, the HOA president, holding a small potted plant. Welcome back, he said awkwardly, extending the plant. Peace, Lily. They're supposed to be good for peace. I accepted it with a small smile. Thanks. Would you like to come in? Charles sat stiffly on my couch, declining my offer of tea or coffee. In his khakis and button-down shirt, he looked every inch the retired accountant he was. But there was something different about him, a new resolve in his posture. I want to apologize again, he began, for what happened with the block dinner. The board has reviewed the situation thoroughly, and we were disturbed by what we found. What do you mean? I asked. Charles shifted uncomfortably. The expense reports, for one thing. Nancy had you covering costs that should have been HOA expenses, and the workload. It was far beyond what any volunteer should be asked to do. I should have spoken up, I admitted. Perhaps, Charles nodded. But Nancy has a way of making people feel they can't say no. We've discovered that pattern has been repeating for years. You're just the first person who finally walked away. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is a check for the expenses you covered personally, with interest. I took the envelope, surprised by the weight of it. Thank you. There's something else, Charles continued. The board is implementing new guidelines for community events. No single volunteer will be responsible for major functions anymore. We're creating actual committees with shared responsibilities. That's good, I said cautiously. We'd like your input on these changes, given your experience. Charles raised a hand as I started to protest. Not as a volunteer, as a paid consultant. Your background in event planning and graphic design would be valuable. I couldn't help but laugh. I'm not an event planner. I'm a graphic designer who got roped into planning a dinner. Exactly, Charles nodded. That's why we need your perspective, to make sure it doesn't happen again. After Charles left, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Sprinklers hissed on perfectly green lawns. Garage doors hummed closed as commuters returned home. Somewhere, a dog barked playfully. It was all so normal, so peaceful. Had it always been this way? Or had I been too consumed by anxiety to notice? My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m. at Morning Brew? I typed back, see you there. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop near the neighborhood entrance to find not just Karen waiting, but 4 other women from Crescent Pines. My stomach clenched with apprehension, but their greetings seemed genuinely warm. We formed a support group, Karen explained with a wry smile as I sat down. Former victims of Nancy's voluntelling. Is that what we're calling it now? I laughed. Seems appropriate, said Diane, a woman I recognized from the garden club. I organized the Easter egg hunt 3 years ago, had to remortgage my house to afford the custom-painted wooden eggs Nancy insisted on. Halloween Carnival 2022, Jennifer chimed in. My husband still flinches when anyone mentions carnival games. 4th of July picnic last year, added Melissa. Nancy told me my potato salad was brave. We spent 2 hours sharing stories, laughing over Nancy's more outrageous demands, and gradually moving from superficial conversation to something that felt surprisingly like friendship. The funny thing is, Karen mused as we prepared to leave, I've lived here for 7 years, and this is the first time I've really talked to any of you. We've been so busy trying to meet Nancy's standards that we never actually connected. So what happens now? I asked. With Nancy off the events committee? Change, hopefully, Diane said. Charles has been talking about a community reset, whatever that means. It means we get to decide what kind of neighborhood we want to be, Karen said firmly. And I vote for one with fewer clipboard-wielding dictators and more actual human interaction. Walking home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because Nancy had been dethroned or because I'd been vindicated, but because for the first time since moving to Crescent Pines, I'd had a genuine connection with my neighbors. That evening, as I sat on my porch with my sketchbook, a familiar figure marched up my walkway. Nancy Prescott, in pressed slacks and a silk blouse, her face set in grim determination. I'd been expecting this confrontation, dreading it even. But as she approached, I realized something surprising. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Hello, Nancy, I said calmly, setting aside my sketchbook. Samantha. Her voice was cold. I see you've decided to show your face again. I live here, I replied simply. Nancy's eyes narrowed. After what you did? You humiliated this entire community. The block dinner was a disaster, pizza delivery and paper plates. The councilwoman left after 30 minutes. That sounds difficult, I said, not taking the bait. But it wasn't my dinner. It was your responsibility. Her voice rose sharply. No, Nancy. It was your vision that you tried to make my responsibility. There's a difference. Her perfect composure cracked slightly. The board has gone. Completely insane. They've removed me from the events committee. Me, after everything I've done for this neighborhood. I studied her face, seeing beyond the anger to something else. Fear, perhaps. Nancy's identity was so wrapped up in controlling Crescent Pines that without that role, she didn't know who she was. I'm sorry that's been difficult for you, I said, and meant it. Nancy blinked, thrown, off by my response. She'd clearly expected either groveling apologies or bitter argument. You've turned everyone against me, she accused, but her voice had lost some of its edge. I haven't spoken to anyone except Charles and a few neighbors for coffee, I said truthfully. Whatever's happening isn't about me, Nancy. Maybe it's just time for things to change. She stood there for a long moment, struggling to find a response. Finally, she turned and walked away without another word. I watched her go, feeling neither triumph nor guilt, just a quiet certainty that I had found my voice at last. The weeks following my return to Crescent Pines unfolded in unexpected ways. My graphic design business began to thrive again as I reconnected with former clients and took on new projects. My home became truly mine. I painted the living room a rich terracotta that would have given Nancy heart palpitations and planted wildflowers instead of the approved HOA rose bushes. Small acts of rebellion, perhaps, but they felt like declarations of independence. My coffee meetings with Karen and the others became a regular Thursday morning ritual. We called ourselves the Recovery Group with self-deprecating humor, but those gatherings were genuinely healing. We talked about our lives beyond Crescent Pines, Karen's photography business, Diane's passion for mystery novels, Jennifer's dream of opening a bakery. Conversations Nancy would have deemed off-topic at her committee meetings. I submitted my consultant recommendations to the HOA board, focusing on creating more inclusive events, with distributed responsibilities. Charles implemented most of them, including a revolutionary concept: potlucks where people could bring whatever they wanted on whatever dishes they had, without theme coordination. Nancy remained a presence in the neighborhood, but a diminished one. She still attended HOA meetings, still maintained her perfect lawn, still made pointed comments about the declining standards of Crescent Pines. But her words no longer carried the weight of authority. One Saturday morning in early September, I was pulling weeds in my front garden, deliberately letting a few wildflowers grow among the HOA-approved perennials, when a shadow fell across the flower bed. "Your coneflowers are thriving," said a male voice I didn't immediately recognize. I looked up to see David Mitchell from 2 streets over. I'd met him briefly at neighborhood functions, but never really talked to him. He was a high school English teacher, if I remembered correctly, and had moved to Crescent Pines around the same time I had. "Thanks," I said, sitting back on my heels. "They're not technically on the approved plant list, but I'm staging a small rebellion." David laughed. "I've got contraband sunflowers in my backyard. Don't tell the authorities." There was something easy about his presence, none of the strained politeness I'd grown accustomed to in Crescent Pines interactions. "Your secret's safe with me," I promised, though I hear the HOA is becoming more progressive about landscaping choices these days. "A brave new world," David agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Actually, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For what you did with the block dinner. Or rather, what you didn't do." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "Most people aren't thanking me for that particular decision. Most people haven't had to chair the fall festival 3 years in a row because Nancy Prescott decided my attention to detail made me perfect for the job." His expression was rueful. "This year, for the first time since I moved here, I get to just attend. No clipboard, no 18-hour days setting up carnival games." "The fall festival?" I asked, realizing I'd never heard of it. "Nancy's other major production. Though I suspect it will be considerably scaled back this year. Charles is talking about community enjoyment rather than presentational excellence." I laughed at his perfect imitation of Charles's formal speaking style. "Well, I'm glad someone benefited from my dramatic exit." "More than someone," David said. "There's been a shift in the neighborhood. People are actually talking to each other now, not just competing over who can volunteer for the most committees." We ended up chatting for nearly an hour, about books and teaching, and the subtle politics of suburban life. As David was leaving, he turned back. "Some of us are having a very informal, completely uncoordinated barbecue next weekend. No matching napkins, no seating chart, probably some paper plates. Would you like to come?" "That sounds suspiciously like actual fun," I said. "I'd love to." The barbecue was everything the block dinner wasn't. Relaxed, genuine, and full of laughter. Children ran through sprinklers while adults chatted in mismatched lawn chairs. The food was plentiful, if not Pinterest-worthy, and nobody seemed to care when the Johnsons' dog stole a burger from the grill. I found myself talking to neighbors I'd lived near for years but never really known. The Thompsons, who'd seemed so intimidating at HOA meetings, turned out to be warm and funny once away from Nancy's influence. Even Margaret Whitman, who'd been part of Nancy's inner circle, approached me with a hesitant apology. "I should have spoken up about how much was being dumped on you," she admitted. "Nancy can be persuasive." "That's one word for it," I agreed, but without bitterness. As the evening wound down, I found myself sitting beside David on his back porch steps, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. "Is this what you imagined when you moved here?" he asked. "Not even close," I admitted. "I thought I needed to earn my place in this community, that if I just volunteered enough or worked hard enough, I'd finally belong. And now? Now I realize belonging isn't something other people give you. It's something you give yourself permission to feel." David nodded. "It took me a long time to learn that, too. I kept trying to make Crescent Pines feel like home by doing what everyone expected. But home isn't about meeting expectations." "What is it about, then?" I asked. He considered for a moment. "I think it's about having the freedom to be yourself and still feel accepted, even if yourself includes contraband sunflowers and imperfect barbecues." I laughed, feeling something warm unfurl in my chest. "I'll drink to that." As I walked home later that night, the neighborhood felt different, or perhaps I was seeing it differently. The perfect lawns and coordinated house colors that had once seemed like standards I needed to meet now just looked like choices some people had made, choices I was free to make differently. For the first time since moving to Crescent Pines, I felt truly at home. Not because I'd finally earned my place, but because I'd stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given all along: the simple right to be myself. The next morning, I woke to an email notification from Charles. "Fall Festival planning meeting. Volunteers needed." My finger hovered over the delete button, old habits urging me to say yes, to volunteer, to prove my worth through exhaustion. Instead, I wrote back a simple response. "Thanks for thinking of me, but I'm focusing on my business right now. I look forward to attending as a neighbor, not a coordinator." I pressed send and felt no guilt, no anxiety, just the quiet satisfaction of maintaining a boundary I'd finally learned to set. Outside my window, a hummingbird darted among my non-regulation wildflowers, wings catching the morning light. I watched it for a long moment, appreciating its beauty and freedom, before turning to my desk to begin my workday. This, I realized, was what I'd been searching for all along. Not the approval of others, but the simple joy of being exactly who I was meant to be. October painted crescent pines in shades of gold and crimson. The neighborhood that had once felt like a beautiful prison now seemed transformed, or perhaps I was the one who had changed. My house became a true reflection of myself. Colorful throw pillows replaced the neutral tones Nancy had once advised for resale value. Art I loved hung on walls instead of strategically placed mirrors to maximize light, and my garden bloomed with whatever caught my fancy at the nursery, HOA approved or not. My Thursday coffee group expanded, becoming less about Nancy recovery and more about genuine friendship. We started a neighborhood book club that met in different homes each month. Homes with mismatched furniture, half-finished renovation projects, and all the beautiful imperfections that make a house feel lived in. The fall festival arrived on the third Saturday of October. Under Charles's new leadership and without Nancy's micromanagement, it was noticeably different. Smaller in scale, but somehow bigger in heart. Local vendors set up booths instead of overpriced caterers. Children's artwork decorated the community center instead of professional floral arrangements. The bounce house was slightly lopsided. The face painting station ran out of blue paint halfway through, and nobody seemed to mind. I wandered through the festival with Karen and Diane, enjoying apple cider and homemade donuts. We passed Nancy standing rigidly by the entrance, her expression a mixture of disdain and disbelief as she watched children run with sticky fingers and adults laugh too loudly. "She looks like she's witnessing the fall of civilization," Karen murmured. "In her mind, she probably is," I replied, but without malice. Nancy's world was built on control and appearances. Watching that world change must have been genuinely distressing for her. As if sensing our gaze, Nancy looked up. Our eyes met across the crowded courtyard. For a moment, I expected the usual cold stare, but something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. She gave a small, stiff nod before turning away. "Was that acknowledgement?" Diane asked, surprised. "Of a sort," I said. "I think that's as close to reconciliation as Nancy and I will ever get." Later, I found myself helping at the pumpkin decorating station when we ran out of pipe cleaners. I was searching through supply boxes when David appeared with a handful of colorful craft supplies. "Thought you might need reinforcements," he said, dumping an assortment of googly eyes and glitter on the table. I raided my classroom art cabinet. "My hero," I laughed, immediately putting the materials to use. "I thought you weren't volunteering this year?" "There's a difference between being voluntold and choosing to help," he pointed out, joining me at the table. One's servitude, the other's community. We worked side by side for the next hour, helping children create pumpkin masterpieces of questionable artistic merit, but undeniable enthusiasm. When things finally slowed down, David asked, "Would you like to grab some cider? I hear the Wilsons added a secret ingredient this year." "Bourbon?" I guessed. "Cinnamon schnapps, actually." Apparently, Nancy always vetoed it as undignified. We found a quiet spot on the edge of the festivities, watching as the afternoon light turned golden over crescent pines. Children chased each other across the community lawn, while parents chatted in small groups. The atmosphere was relaxed, joyful, everything the block dinner had never been. "It's strange," I mused, sipping my definitely enhanced cider. For 3 years, I thought I needed to earn my place here by being perfect, by saying yes to everything, by exhausting myself for people who barely knew my name. "And now?" David asked. "Now I realize that real belonging doesn't require performance. It just requires presence." I gestured toward the festival. "This isn't perfect. The games are a little chaotic, the food is mismatched, and I'm pretty sure that bounce house is going to collapse if one more kid jumps in. But it feels real in a way Nancy's version never did." David nodded. "There's something beautiful about imperfection. It leaves room for growth, for connection." He hesitated, then added, "For discovering things you never expected." The way he looked at me made something flutter in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Not since before Chicago, before the burnout and the broken engagement that had sent me fleeing to Crescent Pines in the first place. "Like what?" I asked. my voice softer than I intended, like discovering that the woman who fled her own block dinner might be the most authentic person in this entire neighborhood. His smile was warm, genuine, and that I'd really like to know her better. As the sun set over the fall festival, strings of mismatched lanterns illuminated the courtyard. No professional lighting scheme, just neighbors who had each brought what they had. The effect was haphazard but somehow magical, like a visible representation of what community really meant. Not uniform perfection, but beautiful, complementary difference. David walked me home after the festival, our conversation flowing easily from books to music to our shared appreciation for bad sci-fi movies. At my doorstep, he hesitated. I know this might be too soon, but I'd like to see you again. Not at a neighborhood function or a committee meeting, just you and me. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the cider. I'd like that. As autumn deepened into winter, my life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and somehow right. My business thrived as I reconnected with my creativity, free from the constant drain of neighborhood obligations. My friendships with Karen, Diane, and others deepened beyond coffee meetings into genuine connections. And my relationship with David evolved slowly, naturally. Weekend hikes, quiet dinners, long conversations by the fireplace. For the first time since moving to Crescent Pines, I felt truly at home. Not because I'd finally earned my place, but because I'd discovered that belonging was never something I needed to earn in the first place. Nancy remained in the neighborhood but grew increasingly isolated as her power base eroded. I saw her occasionally at the grocery store or community meetings, always impeccably dressed, always slightly apart. Sometimes I wondered if she was lonely, if she missed the connection that comes from being part of something, rather than controlling it. One snowy afternoon in December, I was returning from the mailbox when I spotted Nancy struggling to clear her driveway. Her movements were stiff, her breath visible in the cold air. Before I could think better of it, I crossed the street. Need a hand? Nancy looked up, surprise flickering across her face. I can manage. I'm sure you can, I said, picking up a spare shovel leaning against her garage. But it's easier with help. We worked in silence for several minutes, the only sound the scrape of shovels against pavement. Finally, Nancy spoke, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Why are you helping me? After everything? I paused, considering the question. Because that's what neighbors do. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. Nancy didn't respond, but when we finished clearing the driveway, she said simply, "Thank you, Samantha." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that even Nancy Prescott might be capable of change. As I walked, back to my own house, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who had fled in the pre-dawn darkness, desperate to escape the life I'd trapped myself in. I had left seeking freedom, but what I'd found was something deeper, the courage to be imperfectly, authentically myself. And in that authenticity, I had discovered what belonging truly meant. Spring arrived in Crescent Pines with a riot of color, not just the approved HOA plantings, but wildflowers that had somehow spread throughout the neighborhood. Rumors circulated that someone, possibly Karen, had conducted midnight seed bombing missions during the winter. The result was patches of unexpected beauty in the once uniform landscape, nature's rebellion against perfect control. My life had blossomed in similar ways. My business expanded enough that I hired an assistant. My relationship with David deepened into something solid and true. My home became a gathering place for friends, not for planning meetings or committee functions, but for movie nights, impromptu dinners, and genuine connection. When Charles announced plans for the annual block dinner, I felt a momentary tightness in my chest, phantom anxiety from last year's disaster. But this year was different. The core committee had been disbanded in favor of a rotating system where different streets took responsibility for different elements. No single person carried the burden alone. "Will you come?" David asked as we walked through the neighborhood one evening. "I'd understand if you wanted to skip it." I considered the question. "Actually, I think I will. Not to help organize or set up or prove anything. Just to be there. As me." The morning of the block dinner dawned clear and perfect. Unlike last year, I woke without dread, without lists running through my head, without texts from Nancy demanding last-minute changes. I spent the day working on a new design project, then getting ready at a leisurely pace. David picked me up at 6, and we walked to the courtyard together. The transformation was immediately apparent. Instead of Nancy's vision of summer elegance with its rigid perfection, This year's theme seemed to be simply community. Tables of different shapes and sizes clustered throughout the space. Decorations ranged from elegant centerpieces to children's handmade crafts. Some people brought china, others paper plates. The overall effect was mismatched but vibrant, like a patchwork quilt where each piece told a different story. "What do you think?" Charles asked, approaching with a glass of punch. "Not quite up to Nancy's standards, I'm afraid." "It's perfect," I said and meant it. "It looks like a real neighborhood." As I moved through the gathering, neighbors greeted me warmly. No one mentioned last year's disaster directly, but there were knowing smiles, gentle jokes about actually showing up this time, and sincere expressions of appreciation for what my absence had ultimately created, a catalyst for change. Karen waved me over to a table where she sat with several others from our coffee group. "We saved you seats," she said, patting the chair beside her. "Unless you'd rather sit with your boyfriend?" She waggled her eyebrows playfully. "He's helping with the grill," I laughed, joining them. "Apparently, he makes legendary burgers." "Speaking of legends," Diane leaned in, lowering her voice. "Guess who actually showed up?" She nodded toward the entrance, where Nancy stood surveying the scene. She looked different somehow, still perfectly put together in pressed slacks and a designer blouse, but less rigid, less imperial. "Charles invited her," Karen explained. "Said she could come as a guest, not as a coordinator." "Bold move," I remarked, watching as Nancy made her way tentatively into the gathering. What happened next surprised us all. Instead of criticizing or remaining aloof, Nancy began to participate. Awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. She complimented Jennifer's homemade rolls. She laughed at Charles's terrible dad jokes. She even helped serve when the dessert table became crowded. "Is this the Twilight Zone?" Diane whispered. "Did Nancy Prescott just voluntarily help without taking over?" "People can change," I said, though I was just as astonished. Sometimes they just need to see there's another way to be. As twilight fell, lanterns and string lights illuminated the courtyard. Someone brought out a portable speaker, and music filled the air. Couples began to dance in the open space between tables. David found me and pulled me to my feet, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "May I have this dance?" he asked with exaggerated formality. "You may," I laughed, letting him lead me to the impromptu dance floor. As we swayed to the music, I looked around at the courtyard, at the neighbors who had become friends, at the community that had transformed from a collection of perfect houses into a tapestry of imperfect connections. Even Nancy seemed different, chatting with Margaret and Charles at a table near the fountain. "Penny for your thoughts," David murmured, his hand warm against the small of my back. "I was just thinking about how strange life is," I said. "A year ago, I was planning this dinner like my life depended on it. I thought if I could just make it perfect enough, I'd finally belong here. And now? Now I realize I was looking for belonging in all the wrong places. It wasn't in perfect table settings or coordinated decorations or Nancy's approval. It was in moments like this, genuine, imperfect, real." David smiled, pulling me closer. "You know, when you disappeared last year, the whole neighborhood was in shock. Nancy was apocalyptic, of course, but the rest of us, I think we were secretly impressed." "Impressed?" I raised an eyebrow. "By my complete abandonment of responsibility?" "By your courage," he corrected. "It takes guts to walk away from something. That's destroying you, even when everyone expects you to stay. You chose yourself when no one else would." "I just couldn't do it anymore," I admitted. "I couldn't keep trying to earn a place by exhausting myself. And now? Now I know that real belonging isn't something you earn through servitude. It's something you create through authenticity." As the song ended, Charles clinked a glass for attention. Before we continue our evening, I'd like to say a few words. The gathering quieted as Charles moved to the center of the courtyard. Last year's block dinner was, as many of you remember, a bit of a learning experience. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. But sometimes it takes a disruption to see what truly matters. This year, I look around and see not just neighbors, but a community. Not perfect, but perfectly us. He raised his glass. "So, I'd like to propose a toast. To Samantha Parker, who isn't here tonight." "Actually, she is," several voices called out, pointing in my direction. Charles blinked in surprise, then smiled broadly. "Even better, to Samantha, whose absence last year taught us more than her presence ever could have. Sometimes the greatest gift is saying no to what doesn't serve us, so we can say yes to what truly matters." Glasses raised throughout the courtyard. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but also with a strange pride. Not pride in having fled exactly, but in having found the courage to choose myself when no one else would. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing by the fountain, watching the play of light on water. A familiar figure approached, Nancy, her posture less rigid than I remembered. "Hello, Samantha," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Nancy." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party washing over us. Finally, Nancy spoke. "Charles did a good job with the dinner this year." Coming from Nancy, this was high praise indeed. "Yes, he did. It's different than I would have done it," she continued. "Less coordinated, but still beautiful," I suggested. Nancy considered this, looking around at the mismatched tables, the varied decorations, the people laughing and talking in unplanned, organic groupings. "Yes," she said, surprising me. "Still beautiful." Another silence fell, less tense than before. Nancy seemed to be struggling with something, her fingers twisting the strap of her designer handbag. "I owe you an apology," she finally said, the words coming out in a rush. "I put too much on you last year. I've put too much on a lot of people over the years." I blinked, genuinely startled. "Thank you for saying that. The thing is," Nancy continued, her voice lower, "I always thought the neighborhood needed me to make things perfect, that without my guidance, everything would fall apart. And now?" She gestured toward the gathering. "Look at this. It's not perfect. The tablecloths don't match, the lighting is uneven, the food is a hodgepodge. And yet, it works." I finished for her. "Yes," Nancy nodded slowly. "It works, and everyone seems happier." I studied her face, seeing for the first time the insecurity behind the rigid control. Nancy had been so desperate to create perfection that she'd missed the beauty of authentic connection. "You know," I said gently, "there's still a place for you here. Not as the coordinator of everything, but as a neighbor, as yourself." Nancy's smile was small but genuine. "I'm not sure I remember how to be just myself. It's been a long time." "It's never too late to find out," I told her. As Nancy walked away, David appeared at my side with 2 cups of coffee. "Was that a civil conversation with Nancy Prescott?" he asked incredulously. "Has hell frozen over?" I laughed, accepting the coffee. "People can surprise you. Sometimes all they need is to see a different way forward." Later that night, as David and I walked home under a canopy of stars, I thought about the journey of the past year. From desperate people-pleaser to airport escapee to someone who had finally found her place, not by changing to fit the community, but by helping the community change to embrace authenticity. "You're quiet," David observed, his hand warm in mine. "Just thinking about how far we've all come. Not just me, but the whole neighborhood. It started with you, you know," he said, "with one person finally saying, 'Enough.'" I shook my head. It wasn't just me. It was Abby telling me the truth when no one else would. It was Karen reaching out after I came back. It was you and all the others who wanted something more authentic. We reached my front porch, now adorned with wildflowers and wind chimes that would have given the old HOA heart palpitations. David pulled me close, his eyes serious, in the porch light. "What you did took courage, Sam. Walking away when everything in society tells us to keep pleasing, keep accommodating, keep exhausting ourselves for approval." "It didn't feel like courage at the time," I admitted. "It felt like running away." "Sometimes running away is the bravest thing we can do," he said softly. "Sometimes it's the only way to find our way home." As we stood there in the gentle spring night, I realized the truth of his words. My journey hadn't been about fleeing responsibility or abandoning commitment. It had been about discovering that true belonging comes not from what we do for others, but from the courage to be authentically ourselves, imperfect, messy, and real. I had left seeking escape, but what I'd found was something far more valuable: the wisdom to distinguish between serving from love and serving from fear, the strength to say no to demands that diminished me, and most importantly, the understanding that real community doesn't require perfection, only presence, authenticity, and the willingness to see others as they truly are. Looking around at the neighborhood I now genuinely called home, I knew I wouldn't trade this hard-won wisdom for anything. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away from what doesn't serve us, creating space for what truly matters to grow in its place. Like wildflowers in a once perfect lawn, the beauty of authenticity will always find a way to bloom,